Her powerful tycoon bound by an inheritance agreement. A young waitress whose dreams have been crushed by the harshness of life. Two worlds so far apart that they should never have crossed paths until a bold proposal changes everything. A marriage contract, valid for just 1 week. What starts as a temporary solution quickly turns into something far more complicated, testing their emotions, beliefs, and limits. How will this unexpected journey end? Stay until the end and uncover every detail of this captivating story. The Seattle skyline glittered against the night sky, a testament to the wealth and ambition that defined the city. At the pinnacle of the Emerald City's social hierarchy stood David Ross, a man whose name was synonymous with success, power, and unimaginable wealth. At 35, David had built an empire that spanned tech startups, real estate, and venture capital investments. His life was a carefully curated masterpiece of luxury and influence. Yet as he stood in his penthouse overlooking Elliott Bay, a familiar emptiness gnawed at him. David adjusted his perfectly tailored Armani suit, a habit born of restlessness rather than necessity. His reflection in the floor-to-ceiling windows showed a man many would envy, tall, with sharp features softened by piercing blue eyes and dark hair that hinted at a rebellious streak despite its impeccable styling. But those who knew him well, a rare breed indeed, might notice the slight downturn of his mouth, the weariness that no amount of success seemed to erase. "Mr. Ross," his personal assistant's voice crackled through the intercom, "your car is ready. The charity auction begins in an hour." David sighed, reaching for his phone. Another night, another event where he'd be expected to smile, charm, and ultimately open his wallet for a cause he'd likely forget by morning. It wasn't that he didn't care. It was simply that caring had become a luxury he couldn't afford in his relentless pursuit of more. More deals, more zeros in his bank account, more accolades to add to his already impressive resume. As his private elevator descended, David mentally prepared himself for the evening ahead. The Emerald City Gala was the social event of the season, a gathering of Seattle's elite, ostensibly to raise money for children's education, but in reality, a thinly veiled opportunity for the wealthy to network and show off. David knew the drill all too well. He'd smile for the cameras, engage in small talk with people whose names he'd struggled to remember, and bid generously on overpriced auction items he didn't need or want. Across town in a modest apartment that had seen better days, Kendall Smith was rushing to get ready for her shift. At 28, Kendall was a study in contrast to David Ross. Where his life was defined by excess, hers was a constant struggle to make ends meet. Tonight she'd be working as a waitress at the very same charity auction David would be attending, though their paths were never meant to cross in any meaningful way. Kendall pulled her unruly auburn hair into a neat bun, wincing as she caught sight of the dark circles under her green eyes. Double shifts and late-night study sessions were taking their toll, but she refused to give up on her dream of becoming a social worker. Her tiny studio apartment was littered with textbooks and scholarship applications, each representing a glimmer of hope for a better future. "You can do this, Kendall," she muttered to her reflection, straightening the crisp white shirt that was part of her uniform. "Just a few more months of saving, and you'll have enough for next semester's tuition." As she hurried out the door, Kendall's phone buzzed with a text from her grandmother, Lucia. "Remember, mi amor, every chance is an opportunity. Keep your chin up and your heart open. Love you." Kendall smiled, feeling a warmth spread through her chest. Her abuela had raised her after her parents' tragic accident, instilling in her a resilience and optimism that had carried her through the toughest times. With renewed determination, Kendall headed to the bus stop, ready to face another night of balancing trays and dodging the wandering hands of Seattle's elite. The Grand Hyatt's ballroom was a spectacle of opulence. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm glow over tables draped in silk, each setting adorned with delicate orchid arrangements. David entered the room with the easy confidence of a man accustomed to being the center of attention. He nodded to acquaintances, shook hands with business partners, and exchanged pleasantries with Seattle's social butterflies. Meanwhile, Kendall navigated the crowded room with practiced ease. A tray of champagne flutes balanced precariously on her palm. She weaved through the sea of designer gowns and tuxedos, her eyes constantly scanning for empty glasses or gesturing hands. As the evening progressed, David found himself growing increasingly restless. He'd already placed several generous bids, more out of obligation than interest. Just as he was considering making an early exit, a commotion near the dessert table caught his attention. Kendall had been carefully maneuvering through a particularly dense cluster of guests when a drunk patron stumbled backwards, knocking into her with enough force to send her tray flying. Time seemed to slow as glasses shattered, and champagne arced through the air, splattering across the front of an impeccably dressed man who had the misfortune of being in the wrong place at the wrong time. That man was David Ross. For a moment, the entire ballroom fell silent. Kendall stood frozen, horror etched across her face as she stared at the champagne dripping from David's expensive suit. She waited for the explosion, for security to drag her away, for her career, meager as it was, to come crashing down around her. But then something unexpected happened. David Ross, known for his cutthroat business tactics and icy demeanor, began to laugh. It started as a low chuckle and grew into a full-bodied laugh that seemed to surprise even him. "Well," he said, locking eyes with a stunned Kendall, "I'd say this party just got interesting." Kendall's mouth opened and closed, words failing her. I'm so sorry, sir. Please let me help you clean up." David waved off the approaching event staff. "It's fine. Honestly, you might have done me a favor. I was looking for an excuse to leave early." As Kendall hurriedly tried to dab at his suit with a napkin, David found himself intrigued by this flustered young woman. There was something refreshingly genuine about her panic, so different from the carefully constructed facades he encountered daily. "I'm David," he said, surprising himself with the informality. "Kendall," she replied, still mortified. "Kendall Smith, and I swear this has never happened before. I'll pay for the dry cleaning, I promise." David raised an eyebrow. "On a waitress's salary? I think not. How about you let me buy you a coffee instead? You look like you could use a break." Kendall blinked, certain she had misheard. What? No, I couldn't possibly. I'm working and you're..." She gestured vaguely at his entire person, encompassing his obvious wealth and status. "Just a guy in a wetsuit," David finished for her, a hint of a smile playing at his lips. "Come on, I insist. Consider it my good deed for the evening." Before Kendall could protest further, David had smoothly guided her towards the exit, deftly avoiding the curious stares of the other guests. As they stepped out into the cool Seattle night, neither could have predicted how this chance encounter would change the course of their lives. The following morning, David sat in his home office, nursing a cup of strong black coffee and replaying the events of the previous night in his mind. His conversation with Kendall had been refreshing. She was smart, passionate about her studies in social work, and had a wit that had caught him off guard more than once. For the first time in years, David had felt genuinely engaged in a conversation that wasn't about business or social climbing. His reverie was interrupted by a sharp knock on the door. "Come in," he called, expecting his assistant with the day's schedule. Instead, his lawyer, Richard Holbrook, entered the room with a grave expression. "David, we need to talk. It's about your grandfather's will." David frowned. His grandfather, the family patriarch and founder of the Ross fortune, had passed away 6 months ago. The reading of the will had been straightforward, or so he'd thought. "What's the problem, Richard?" The lawyer cleared his throat uncomfortably. "It seems there was a codicil to the will that we overlooked. Your grandfather added a condition to your inheritance of the family company and the bulk of his personal fortune." David's frown deepened. "What kind of condition?" "Marriage," Richard said bluntly. "You need to be married and stay married for at least 1 year to receive your full inheritance. If you don't comply within the next month, everything goes to your cousin Thomas." For a moment, David was sure he had misheard. Then, as the reality of the situation sank in, he felt a mixture of anger and disbelief wash over him. "That's ridiculous. It can't be legal." Richard shrugged. "I'm afraid it is. Your grandfather was very traditional in his views. He worried about the family legacy and wanted to ensure you'd settle down." David stood abruptly, pacing the length of his office. "This is insane. I can't just get married on a whim. Do you know what the tabloids would do with this? Not to mention the impact on the company's stock if word got out that my position was in jeopardy." As David ranted, his mind raced through potential solutions. He couldn't lose the company. It was his life's work, built on the foundation his grandfather had laid but expanded and modernized under David's leadership. And the personal fortune, well, he'd grown accustomed to a certain lifestyle. Suddenly, an image flashed in his mind. Kendall Smith with her honest green eyes and quick smile. An idea began to form. A crazy, potentially disastrous idea. "Richard," David said slowly, "what if I told you I might have a solution?" The lawyer looked at him warily. "I'm listening. What if I were to enter into a contract marriage? Strictly business, with clear terms and an exit strategy. Would that satisfy the conditions of the will?" Richard considered this for a moment. Technically, yes. As long as the marriage is legal and lasts for the specified time, it would meet the requirements. "But David, are you sure about this? It's a huge risk." David's mind was already racing ahead, formulating plans and contingencies. "I think I know just the person, someone who needs financial help and who I believe I can trust to keep this arrangement professional." As Richard reluctantly began to outline the legal parameters of such an arrangement, David pulled out his phone. He hesitated for just a moment before dialing the number Kendall had given him the night before. Across town, Kendall was just finishing her morning shift at a local diner when her phone rang. She answered without checking the caller ID, balancing the phone between her ear and shoulder as she counted her meager tips. "Hello? Kendall? It's David Ross. I have a business proposition for you. Can we meet?" Kendall nearly dropped the phone in surprise. Whatever she had been expecting, it certainly wasn't this. Her grandmother's words echoed in her mind. "Every chance is an opportunity." "I'm sure," she heard herself say. "When and where?" As she jotted down the details for their meeting, Kendall couldn't shake the feeling that her life was about to change dramatically. She had no idea just how right she was. The sleek, modern lines of David Ross's downtown Seattle office seemed to mock Kendall as she sat across from him, her hands clasped tightly in her lap to hide their trembling. The proposal he had just laid out was so outlandish, so far removed from her reality, that she was half convinced she was dreaming. "Let me get this straight," Kendall said slowly, her green eyes wide with disbelief. "You want me to marry you for a year, and in return you'll pay off my student loans and set me up with a job at one of your charitable foundations?" David leaned back in his ergonomic chair, his expression a mixture of hope and apprehension. "That's the gist of it, yes. It would be a business arrangement, pure and simple. We'd live together to maintain appearances, but separate bedrooms, of course. After a year, we'd quietly divorce, and you'd be free to pursue your career with a clean financial slate." Kendall's mind raced. The practical part of her brain, the part that had been stretching every dollar and subsisting on ramen noodles for years, was screaming at her to accept. This could be her ticket out of poverty, a chance to finish her degree without the crushing weight of debt. But the idealistic side of her, the part that believed in true love and happily ever afters, recoiled at the idea of such a cold, calculated union. "Why me?" she asked finally. "Surely there are plenty of women in your social circle who'd jump at this chance." David's lips quirked in a wry smile. "Precisely why I can't choose one of them. The risk of it turning into a real entanglement, or of the truth getting out, is too high. You, Kendall, are an unknown quantity. Plus, after our conversation the other night, I believe you have the integrity to see this through without trying to exploit the situation." Kendall felt a flush of pride at his assessment, quickly followed by a wave of uncertainty. I need time to think about this. It's a lot to process." "Of course," David nodded, sliding a thick folder across the desk. "Here's the contract. Take it home, read it over. My lawyer's contact information is inside if you have any questions. I'll need your decision by the end of the week." As Kendall left the office, contract clutched to her chest. She felt as though she had stepped into an alternate reality. The bustling streets of Seattle seemed surreal, the faces of passers-by blurring as her mind whirled with possibilities and doubts. That night, in her tiny studio apartment, Kendall pored over the contract. The terms were generous, almost overwhelmingly so. Full payment of her student loans, a substantial monthly allowance, and a guaranteed position at the Ross Foundation after the year was up. In return, she would be expected to play the role of devoted wife in public, attend social events, and maintain the illusion of a happy marriage. As dawn broke, Kendall found herself dialing her grandmother's number, desperate for advice. "Abuela," she said when Lucia answered, her voice thick with emotion, "I need your wisdom." After explaining the situation in hushed tones, careful to omit any identifying details, Kendall waited anxiously for her grandmother's response. "Mi amor," Lucia said finally, her voice warm with affection. "Life rarely offers us easy choices, but sometimes The most unexpected paths lead us to where we're meant to be. Your heart is good, Kendall. Trust it to guide you, even in unusual circumstances. With her grandmother's blessing and her own reservations cautiously set aside, Kendall made her decision. 3 days later, she found herself back in David's office, pen hovering over the dotted line that would irreversibly alter the course of her life. "Are you sure about this?" David asked, a note of concern in his voice. Kendall met his gaze, summoning every ounce of courage she possessed. "Yes," she said firmly, and signed her name. The next week passed in a whirlwind of activity. Kendall terminated the lease on her apartment, packed up her meager belongings, and said goodbye to her jobs at the diner and as an event waitress. She tried to ignore the pang of loss as she looked around her empty studio one last time. This place, small and shabby as it was, had been her haven, her first real home after leaving her grandmother's house. Now she was trading it for a mansion and a life she could scarcely imagine. David's home, a sprawling modern masterpiece overlooking Puget Sound, was everything Kendall's apartment wasn't. As she stepped through the front door, rolling suitcase in tow, she felt like an intruder in a museum. "Welcome home," David said, the words sounding as foreign to him as they felt to Kendall. "Let me show you to your room." The bedroom he led her to was larger than her entire old apartment, with a view that took her breath away. Floor-to-ceiling windows looked out over the water, the Seattle skyline glittering in the distance. "This is too much," Kendall breathed, overwhelmed by the luxury surrounding her. David shrugged, looking almost embarrassed. "It's just a room. Make it your own. Oh, and Lisa, my housekeeper, has cleared some space in the closets for your things. She'll be by tomorrow to help you settle in." As he turned to leave, Kendall called out, "David." He paused, looking back at her. "Thank you," she said softly, "for all of this." A flicker of something, surprise, warmth, passed over his face before his usual composed mask slipped back into place. "You're welcome. Good night, Kendall." Left alone in her new room, Kendall sank onto the plush king-sized bed, feeling very small and very out of place. As she unpacked her clothes, which looked pitifully shabby next to the empty expanse of the walk-in closet, she wondered, not for the first time, if she had made a terrible mistake. The first few weeks of their arrangement were marked by an awkwardness that bordered on comedic. They danced around each other in the mornings, David buried in his phone while Kendall tried to figure out how to use the complicated coffee machine. Dinners, when they happened to be home at the same time, were quiet affairs punctuated by stilted attempts at small talk. It was during one of these dinners that David broached the subject of their first public appearance as a couple. "There's a charity gala next month," he said, pushing his barely touched salmon around his plate. "The Ross Foundation is a major donor, so we'll need to attend together." Kendall nearly choked on her water. "A gala? I've never been to one. At least not as a guest." David's brow furrowed. "Right. Well, we'll need to prepare you. I'll arrange for a stylist and perhaps some etiquette lessons." The word lessons stung more than Kendall cared to admit. "I'm not completely uncivilized, you know," she said, a hint of defensiveness creeping into her voice. David had the grace to look abashed. "That's not what I meant. It's just this world. My world. It has its own set of rules. Arbitrary and often ridiculous rules, but rules nonetheless. I'm trying to protect you from the sharks." Kendall softened slightly at his explanation. "I appreciate that, but maybe instead of lessons, you could just show me? Teach me yourself?" A look of surprise flashed across David's face, quickly replaced by a small smile. "I suppose I could do that. We could start with dancing. Most of these events involve at least some dancing, and it's best to be prepared." And so on a rainy Seattle evening, Kendall found herself in David's home gym, which he had cleared for their impromptu dance lesson. She stood awkwardly in the center of the room, hyper-aware of David's proximity, as he demonstrated the proper frame for a waltz. "Relax," he murmured, gently adjusting her posture. "Dancing is about feeling the music, not rigidly following steps." As David's hand came to rest on her waist, Kendall felt a jolt of electricity shoot through her. She looked up startled to find him watching her with an intensity that made her breath catch. For a moment, the air between them seemed to crackle with an energy neither was prepared to acknowledge. Then, David cleared his throat, breaking the spell. "Let's try it with music," he said, his voice slightly rougher than usual. As they moved around the room, Kendall slowly began to relax, allowing David to guide her through the steps. She was acutely aware of the warmth of his hand on her back, the strength in his frame, as he led her through turns and dips. By the end of the evening, she was flushed and breathless, but smiling. "You're a natural," David said, as the final notes of the song faded away. Was it her imagination, or did he seem reluctant to let her go? "I had a good teacher," Kendall replied, stepping back and immediately missing the warmth of his embrace. "Thank you, David. This was nice." As she headed to her room that night, Kendall couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted between them. It was subtle, barely perceptible, but it was there, a new awareness, a tension that hadn't existed before. The night of the gala arrived all too quickly. Kendall stood in front of her bedroom mirror, hardly recognizing the woman staring back at her. The stylist David had hired had worked miracles, transforming her into someone who looked like she belonged in his world. Her auburn hair was swept up in an elegant updo, her makeup subtle but enhancing her natural beauty. The gown, a deep emerald that brought out the color of her eyes, hugged her curves before flowing gracefully to the floor. A soft knock at the door startled her out of her reverie. "Come in," she called, expecting Lisa, the housekeeper. Instead, David stepped into the room, looking devastatingly handsome in a perfectly tailored tuxedo. He stopped short when he saw her, his eyes widening appreciatively. "Kendall," he said, his voice low and warm, "you look stunning." She blushed under his gaze, unused to such open admiration from him. "Thank you. You clean up pretty well yourself." David chuckled, some of the tension easing from his shoulders. "Are you ready for this? Remember, these people can smell fear. Just stick close to me, smile, and if anyone asks how we met, we reconnected at last month's charity auction and had an instant connection," Kendall finished for him. "Don't worry, I've memorized our cover story." David nodded approvingly. "Good. Shall we?" He offered her his arm, and together they descended the stairs, looking every inch the perfect power couple. The gala was a whirlwind of glittering lights, flowing champagne, and faces that all seemed to blur together. Kendall clung to David's arm, grateful for his steady presence as they navigated the crowd. She smiled and nodded at appropriate intervals, desperately trying to remember the names and titles David murmured in her ear before each introduction. It was during a rare moment alone, as David was pulled away by a business associate, that Kendall encountered Sophia Ross. David's sister was a vision in a sleek black gown, her dark hair and sharp features marking her unmistakably as a Ross. Her eyes, the same piercing blue as her brother's, scrutinized Kendall with unconcealed suspicion. "So," Sophia said, her voice dripping with false sweetness, "you're the waitress who managed to snag Seattle's most eligible bachelor. How quaint." Kendall felt her cheeks burn with embarrassment and a flicker of anger. "I prefer the term student," she replied, striving to keep her voice level, "and I didn't snag anyone. David and I connected over our shared passion for social causes." Sophia's perfectly sculpted eyebrow arched skeptically. "Is that so? And I suppose your humble background had nothing to do with my brother's sudden interest in settling down." Before Kendall could formulate a response, she felt a warm hand on the small of her back. David had returned, his expression cool as he regarded his sister. "Sophia," he said, his tone a warning, "I see you've met my wife. I trust you're making her feel welcome." Sophia's smile didn't reach her eyes. "Of course, dear brother. We were just getting acquainted." With a final appraising look at Kendall, she glided away to join another group of socialites. Kendall let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. "Your sister is intense," David sighed, guiding Kendall towards the bar. "I apologize for Sophia. She's protective, sometimes to a fault. Are you okay?" Kendall nodded, touched by his concern. "I'm fine, just a little overwhelmed." "Does everyone here think I'm some kind of gold digger?" David's expression softened. "Don't let them get to you. These people, their opinions change with the wind. Give it time, and they'll see what I see. A kind, intelligent woman who's far too good for this shallow world." His words, spoken with such sincerity, caused a warm flutter in Kendall's chest. She looked up at him, really looked, and for a moment saw past the polished exterior to the man underneath, a man who perhaps was just as lost and searching as she was. The moment was broken by the arrival of Richard Holbrook, David's lawyer. "David, Kendall," he greeted them, his eyes darting between the two with poorly concealed curiosity. "Quite the event, isn't it?" "Kendall, how are you finding married life?" Kendall forced a smile, acutely aware of David's hand still resting on her back. "It's an adjustment," she said carefully, "but a wonderful one. David has been very patient with me as I learn to navigate this new world." Richard nodded approvingly. "I'm glad to hear it. You two make a striking couple. The board will be pleased to see David settling down with such a charming young woman." As Richard wandered off to mingle with other guests, Kendall felt a twinge of guilt. The easy lies were becoming second nature, and she wasn't sure how she felt about that. The rest of the evening passed in a blur of polite conversation and carefully orchestrated appearances. By the time they returned home, Kendall's feet were aching and her cheeks hurt from smiling. She kicked off her heels with a groan of relief as soon as they were through the door. "Well," David said, loosening his bow tie, "I'd say that was a success. You handled yourself beautifully, Kendall, even with Sophia's interrogation." Kendall smiled wearily. "Thanks. I still felt like an imposter the whole time, but I guess that's normal." David's expression turned thoughtful. "You know, I've been attending these events my whole life, and sometimes I still feel like an imposter. The trick is to remember that most people there feel the same way. We're all just pretending to have it all together." His candid admission surprised Kendall. It was moments like these, when David let his guard down, that she felt closest to him. Impulsively, she reached out and squeezed his hand. "Thank you, David, for everything. I know this isn't a real marriage, but I'm glad it's you I'm doing this with." David looked down at their joined hands, a myriad of emotions flickering across his face too quickly for Kendall to decipher. "I'm glad too," he said softly, giving her hand a gentle squeeze before letting go. "Good night, Kendall." As Kendall lay in bed that night, replaying the events of the evening, she couldn't shake the feeling that something fundamental had changed. The lines between their business arrangement and something more personal were beginning to blur, and she wasn't sure if she was terrified or thrilled by the prospect. In the weeks that followed, a new rhythm began to develop in the Ross household. Mornings became a quiet, companionable affair, with David and Kendall sharing coffee and occasionally conversation before starting their days. Kendall threw herself into her new role at the Ross Foundation, grateful for the opportunity to make a real difference in people's lives. David, for his part, seemed to be making an effort to be home more often, joining Kendall for dinner when his schedule allowed. It was during one of these dinners that Kendall noticed David seemed distracted, his brow furrowed, as he absently pushed food around his plate. "Is everything okay?" she asked, concerned by his uncharacteristic behavior. David looked up, seeming surprised by the question. "What? Oh yes, just work stuff. Nothing for you to worry about." Kendall frowned, setting down her fork. "David, I know this isn't a real marriage, but we are living together. If something's bothering you, you can talk to me about it. I'm a pretty good listener." For a moment it seemed like David might brush her off again. Then, to her surprise, his shoulders sagged slightly. "It's the Miller account," he admitted. "A huge deal that could revolutionize our clean energy division, but the negotiations are complicated. If we can't close this deal, it could set the company back years in terms of sustainable technology development." Kendall listened intently as David explained the intricacies of the deal, the competing interests, and the pressure he was under to make it work. As he spoke, she was struck by the passion in his voice when he talked about the potential environmental impact of the project. "I had no idea you were so invested in clean energy," she said when he finished. David looked almost embarrassed. "It's personal. My mother died of lung cancer when I was a teenager. The doctors said it was likely due to environmental factors. Since then, I've been determined to make a difference in that area, even if most people just see Ross Enterprises as another soulless corporation." Kendall felt a rush of warmth towards him. This was a side of David she'd never seen before, vulnerable, passionate, driven by something more than just profit margins. "Is there anything I can do to help?" she asked impulsively. David's eyebrows rose in surprise. "With the deal, I don't think—" "Not directly with the negotiations," Kendall clarified, "but maybe I could help you prepare. Be a sounding board. Sometimes just talking things through with someone can help clarify your thoughts." For a moment, David looked like he might refuse. Then slowly a smile spread across his face. "You know what? That might actually be helpful. Thank you, Kendall." That night marked a turning point in their relationship. As they cleared the dishes together, a task David had initially protested but now seemed to enjoy, Kendall realized that for the first time since moving in, she felt truly comfortable in David's presence. The awkwardness that had defined their early interactions was fading, replaced by a growing sense of camaraderie and mutual respect. Over the next few weeks, Kendall and David fell into a new routine. In the evenings, they would often retire to David's home office where he would walk her through the latest developments in the Miller negotiations. Kendall listened attentively, asking questions and offering insights that sometimes surprised David with their perceptiveness. One night, as they pored over financial projections, Kendall noticed David rubbing his temples, his face drawn with fatigue. "Hey," she said softly, "why don't we take a break? You look like you could use one." David glanced at his watch, looking surprised to see how late it had gotten. "You're right, I'm sorry, Kendall. I didn't mean to keep you up so late with all of this." Kendall waved off his apology. "I offered to help, remember? Besides, it's interesting. I never thought I'd find myself so invested in corporate negotiations." David chuckled, leaning back in his chair. "Life has a way of surprising us, doesn't it? A few months ago, I never would have imagined I'd be married to someone like you." The words hung in the air between them, laden with unspoken meaning. Kendall felt her heart skip a beat as David's eyes met hers, his gaze soft and warm in a way she'd never seen before. "David," she began, not sure what she was going to say, but feeling like she needed to say something. Before she could continue, a sharp knock at the door broke the moment. Lisa, the housekeeper, poked her head in. "Mr. Ross, there's an urgent call for you from the Tokyo office." David sighed, the spell broken. "Thank you, Lisa. I'll take it in here." He turned to Kendall, an apologetic look on his face. "I'm sorry, I have to—" "It's fine," Kendall said quickly, standing up. "I should get some sleep anyway. Good night, David." As she closed the office door behind her, Kendall leaned against the wall, her heart pounding. What had just happened? Or almost happened? She shook her head, trying to clear her thoughts. This was dangerous territory. Their arrangement was supposed to be purely business, nothing more. But as she got ready for bed that night, Kendall couldn't shake the memory of David's eyes, or the way her body had reacted to his proximity. The next morning, an unusually tense silence hung over the breakfast table. David seemed lost in thought, barely touching his coffee, while Kendall found herself uncharacteristically tongue-tied. Finally, David cleared his throat. "Kendall, about last night." "It's okay," she interrupted quickly. "We were both tired. It was nothing." A flicker of something, disappointment, relief, crossed David's face. "Right, of course, nothing." As Kendall watched David leave for work, she couldn't help but feel like they'd just taken a step backwards. The easy companionship of the past few weeks felt suddenly fragile, and she wasn't sure how to bridge the growing gap between them. Little did she know, the real challenges to their arrangement were only just beginning. The Seattle skyline glittered in the early morning light as David Ross stood in his office, gazing out at the city he'd helped shape. His phone buzzed insistently on the desk behind him, a constant reminder of the decision looming over him. With a deep sigh, he turned and picked it up, scanning the latest email from his board of directors. The opportunity was unprecedented, a chance to expand Ross Enterprises into the Asian market in a way that would cement the company's global dominance for decades to come. It was the kind of deal that could define a legacy, the culmination of years of hard work and strategic planning. There was just one catch. It would require David to relocate to Tokyo for at least 2 years, effective immediately. As he scrolled through the projected financials, David's mind wandered to Kendall. The thought of leaving her behind created an unexpected ache in his chest. Over the past few months, she had become more than just a convenient solution to his inheritance problem. She was his confidant, his partner in navigating the often treacherous waters of Seattle's high society. And lately, if he was honest with himself, she was becoming something even more. A knock at the door interrupted his reverie. "Come in," he called, quickly locking his phone screen. Richard Holbrook, his lawyer and longtime friend, entered the office with a grave expression. "David, we need to talk about the Tokyo offer." David nodded, gesturing for Richard to take a seat. "I assumed that's why you're here at this ungodly hour." "What's the legal situation?" Richard's frown deepened as he settled into the chair across from David's desk. "It's complicated. The terms of your grandfather's will are clear. You need to remain married and residing in Seattle for the full year to retain control of the company and your inheritance. This move to Tokyo, it would violate those terms." David ran a hand through his hair, frustration evident in every line of his body. So you're telling me I have to choose between the biggest business opportunity of my career and my grandfather's outdated notion of what my life should look like? Essentially, yes, Richard confirmed. Unless... David's eyes snapped to his lawyer's face. Unless what? Richard shifted uncomfortably. Well, there is a clause that would allow for temporary relocation if it's in the best interest of the company, but it would require Kendall to go with you. Your marriage needs to appear rock solid, especially to the board. The idea of asking Kendall to uproot her life, to put her studies and her work with the foundation on hold, felt wrong on a fundamental level. She had dreams of her own, ambitions that had nothing to do with his world of corporate machinations. That's not an option, David said firmly. Kendall has her own life here. I can't ask her to give that up for a business deal. Richard raised an eyebrow. Even if it means losing everything. David, this isn't just about the inheritance anymore. If you violate the terms of the will, you could lose control of the company. Everything you've worked for could end up in Thomas's hands. The mention of his cousin, a man more interested in yacht parties than sustainable business practices, made David's stomach churn. He'd fought too hard, sacrificed too much, to let the company fall into such irresponsible hands. I need time to think, David said finally. Give me a few days to figure this out. As Richard left, David sank into his chair, the weight of the decision pressing down on him. For the first time in his life, the clear path forward in his career felt murky, complicated by emotions he wasn't quite ready to name. That evening, as David drove home, his mind raced with potential solutions, each one seeming more impossible than the last. He was so lost in thought that he almost missed the turn into his driveway. As he pulled up to the house, he saw Kendall through the kitchen window, dancing around as she cooked dinner, her hair piled messily on top of her head. The sight of her, so at ease in what had become their shared space, made his heart constrict painfully. Inside, the aroma of garlic and herbs filled the air. Kendall turned as he entered, a bright smile lighting up her face. Hey, I hope you're hungry. I'm trying out this new recipe I found, chicken piccata. It might be a total disaster, but at least it smells good, right? David couldn't help but smile back, some of the tension easing from his shoulders. It smells amazing. I didn't know you could cook. Kendall shrugged, a slight blush coloring her cheeks. I'm learning. Figure it's a useful skill to have, especially since your chef quit last month. The casual reminder of how seamlessly Kendall had integrated herself into his life only added to David's inner turmoil. He watched as she moved confidently around the kitchen, chattering about her day at the foundation and the progress they were making on a new youth outreach program. As they sat down to eat, David found himself studying Kendall's face, trying to memorize every detail. The way her eyes crinkled when she laughed, the small dimple that appeared in her left cheek when she smiled. When had he started noticing these things? When had her happiness become so intrinsically linked to his own? David, Kendall's voice broke through his thoughts. Is everything okay? You've barely touched your food. He blinked, realizing he'd been pushing the chicken around his plate absently. Sorry, I have a lot on my mind. Concern clouded Kendall's features. Is it the Miller deal? I thought things were progressing well with that. No, it's not Miller, David sighed. He hesitated for a moment before deciding that honesty was the best approach. There's a new opportunity, a big one, in Tokyo. Kendall's eyebrows rose. Tokyo? Wow, that sounds exciting. What kind of opportunity? As David explained the basics of the deal, leaving out the complications with the will for now, he watched Kendall's reactions carefully. Her genuine enthusiasm for his potential success both warmed his heart and made the situation even more painful. That's incredible, David, Kendall exclaimed when he finished. It sounds like exactly the kind of expansion you've been working towards. When would you leave? The question hung in the air between them, heavy with unspoken implications. David swallowed hard. That's complicated. The board wants me there as soon as possible, for at least 2 years. Kendall's smile faltered slightly. Oh, I see. And what does that mean for us? For this arrangement? The careful way she said arrangement felt like a knife twisting in David's gut. Is that all this was to her? An arrangement? He realized with a start that he desperately wanted it to be more. I don't know, he admitted. There are legal complications with the will. Richard is looking into our options, but... Kendall nodded slowly, her expression unreadable. But you'd have to go soon, and I can't go with you. Kendall, David started, not sure what he was going to say, but needing to say something. She held up a hand, stopping him. It's okay, David, really. This is an incredible opportunity for you. We both knew this situation was temporary. If you need to end things early, I understand. Her words, meant to be reassuring, felt like a blow. David stared at her, trying to reconcile the ache in his chest with Kendall's apparent acceptance of their impending separation. Is that what you want? He asked quietly. To end things. Kendall's eyes widened slightly, a flicker of something. Hope, fear, passing through them. I want what's best for you, David. This deal sounds like it could be life-changing for your career. I don't want to stand in the way of that. The selflessness of her response only made David's inner conflict more acute. Here was a woman who genuinely cared about his success, who had brought light and warmth into his life in ways he'd never expected, and he was considering walking away from it all for a business deal. What if I don't want to end things? The words were out of David's mouth before he could stop them, hanging in the air between them like a live wire. Kendall's breath caught audibly. What are you saying, David? He stood abruptly, needing to move, to think. I don't know. These past few months, Kendall, I've never... As David struggled to articulate the tumult of emotions swirling inside him, Kendall watched him with a mixture of hope and trepidation. David, she said softly, we can't keep pretending. Whatever this is between us, it's not just an arrangement anymore, is it? The vulnerability in her voice broke something open in David's chest. He turned to face her, his eyes meeting hers with an intensity that made her breath catch. No, he said simply. It's not. For a moment they stood frozen, the weight of the admission settling over them. Then, as if drawn by an invisible force, they moved towards each other. David's hand came up to cup Kendall's cheek, his thumb tracing the curve of her jaw. Kendall leaned into his touch, her eyes fluttering closed. Just as their lips were about to meet, the shrill ring of David's phone shattered the moment. They jumped apart, the spell broken. David cursed under his breath as he saw the caller ID. It was the head of the board, undoubtedly calling about the Tokyo deal. I have to take this, he said apologetically. Kendall nodded, already backing away. Of course. I'll just clean up here. As David retreated to his office to take the call, Kendall leaned against the kitchen counter, her heart pounding. What had just almost happened? And more importantly, what did it mean for their future? The next few days passed in a haze of tension and unspoken words. David was constantly on the phone or in meetings, the pressure to make a decision about Tokyo mounting with each passing hour. Kendall threw herself into her work at the foundation, trying to ignore the growing knot of anxiety in her stomach. They danced around each other in the evenings, both hyper-aware of the other's presence, but unsure how to bridge the gap that had opened between them. The almost kiss hung over them like a cloud, simultaneously drawing them together and pushing them apart. Finally, after a particularly long and grueling day of negotiations, David returned home to find Kendall waiting for him in the living room. The determined set of her jaw told him that the conversation they'd been avoiding was about to happen, whether he was ready for it or not. We need to talk, Kendall said as soon as he walked in. David nodded, loosening his tie as he sank into the armchair across from her. You're right, we do. Kendall took a deep breath, steeling herself. I've been thinking a lot about everything. This arrangement, the Tokyo deal, what almost happened the other night. And I think it's time for me to go. David felt as though the wind had been knocked out of him. Go? What do you mean? I mean, I should move out, Kendall clarified, her voice trembling slightly despite her efforts to keep it steady. This situation, it's become too complicated. You have this amazing opportunity in Tokyo and I can't be the reason you don't take it. Kendall, no, David started, leaning forward. That's not... Please let me finish, she interrupted. When we started this, it was supposed to be simple, a business arrangement. But now there are feelings involved, at least on my end. She paused, looking down at her hands. And I can't keep pretending that watching you leave wouldn't break my heart. The raw honesty in her words struck David like a physical blow. He wanted to tell her that she had it all wrong, that the thought of leaving her was tearing him apart. But the words stuck in his throat, years of emotional guardedness holding him back. Kendall, interpreting his silence as confirmation, nodded sadly. I understand. Your career has to come first. I'll start packing my things tonight. As she stood to leave, David finally found his voice. "Wait," he said, reaching out to catch her hand. "Kendall, please, don't go." She turned back to him, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "Why? Give me one good reason why I should stay." David opened his mouth, then closed it again. He knew what he wanted to say, what he needed to say, but the words wouldn't come. A lifetime of putting business first, of guarding his heart, held him back. Kendall's face crumpled slightly at his silence. She gently extracted her hand from his grasp. "That's what I thought," she whispered. "Goodbye, David." As she walked away, David felt as though his world was crumbling around him. He wanted to call out, to stop her, to tell her that she meant more to him than any business deal ever could. But he remained frozen, watching as the best thing that had ever happened to him slipped through his fingers. The next morning, David woke to an empty house. Kendall's room was bare, her few possessions gone. On the kitchen counter, he found a note. "David, thank you for everything. These past few months have meant more to me than you'll ever know. I hope you find all the success you deserve in Tokyo. Take care of yourself, Kendall." The finality of it hit David like a punch to the gut. She was gone, and it was entirely his fault. For the next week, David went through the motions of his life in a daze. He attended meetings, made phone calls, and continued negotiations for the Tokyo deal, but his heart wasn't in it. Every decision, every conversation felt hollow without Kendall's input, without her smile waiting for him at the end of the day. It was during a crucial conference call with the Tokyo team that everything came to a head. As the executives on the other end of the line laid out the final terms of the deal, David found his mind wandering to Kendall. He thought of her passion for helping others, her determination to make a difference in the world. He thought of her laugh, the way her eyes lit up when she talked about her dreams for the future. And suddenly, with a clarity that was almost painful, David realized what he had to do. "I'm sorry," he said, interrupting the chief financial officer mid-sentence. "I can't do this." A stunned silence fell over the call. "Mr. Ross," the CFO said cautiously, "perhaps we should take a break and reconvene." "No," David said firmly. I can't take this deal." Ross Enterprises will not be expanding into the Tokyo market at this time. The uproar on the other end of the line was immediate. Board members protested, lawyers warned of potential consequences. But David stood firm. For the first time in his life, he was listening to his heart instead of his head. As soon as the call ended, David was out the door, barely pausing to grab his keys. He drove through the streets of Seattle with a single-minded focus, his heart pounding with equal parts fear and determination. He found Kendall at her grandmother's house, curled up on the porch swing with a book. She looked up as he approached, her eyes widening in surprise. "David? What are you doing here?" He took a deep breath, steeling himself for the most important speech of his life. "I'm an idiot," he began, eliciting a startled laugh from Kendall. "I've spent my whole life chasing success, thinking that if I just worked hard enough, made enough money, closed enough deals, I'd be happy. But then you came along, and you turned my whole world upside down." Kendall stood slowly, her book forgotten. "David, what are you saying?" "I'm saying I don't want the Tokyo deal. I don't want any deal if it means losing you. These past few months with you, Kendall, they've been the happiest of my life. You make me want to be better, to do better. You challenge me, you support me, you make me laugh, and the thought of a life without you in it, it's unbearable." Tears were streaming down Kendall's face now, but she made no move to wipe them away. "But your career, the company," David shook his head, stepping closer to her. "None of it matters without you. I love you, Kendall. I think I have for a while now. I was just too scared to admit it. But I'm not scared anymore. I love you, and if you'll have me, I want to make this marriage real. No contracts, no arrangements, just us figuring it out together." For a moment that felt like an eternity. Kendall simply stared at him, her eyes searching his face. Then, slowly, a smile broke through her tears. "You stupid, wonderful man," she said, her voice choked with emotion. "I love you too." David's heart soared. He closed the distance between them, pulling Kendall into his arms and kissing her with all the passion and longing he'd been holding back for months. She responded with equal fervor, her hands coming up to tangle in his hair. When they finally broke apart, both breathless and grinning, David rested his forehead against Kendall's, savoring the moment. "So," he said softly, "does this mean you'll come home?" Kendall laughed, the sound music to David's ears. "Home," she repeated as if testing out the word. I like the sound of that. As they stood there, wrapped in each other's arms on the porch of Kendall's childhood home, both felt the shift in their relationship. The pretense was gone, replaced by something real and profound. They knew there would be challenges ahead, David's board to appease, Kendall's studies to complete, and the inevitable scrutiny that would come with their unconventional love story. But for the first time, they were facing it all together, not as a business arrangement, but as partners in every sense of the word. What happens now? Kendall asked, her voice a mixture of excitement and trepidation. David smiled, tucking a stray strand of hair behind her ear. Now we start living our life, for real this time. As they walked hand in hand to David's car, both felt a sense of anticipation for the future. The road ahead was uncertain, but they were ready to face it together, their love a compass guiding them forward. The drive back to what was now truly their home was filled with conversation, laughter, and plans for the future. It was as if a dam had broken, releasing all the thoughts and feelings they'd been holding back for months. You know, Kendall said, as they pulled into the driveway, we're going to have to tell people the truth eventually, about how we really got together. David chuckled, turning off the engine. You're right, but let's cross that bridge when we come to it. For now, I just want to enjoy being with you. No pretenses, no hiding. As they entered the house, the familiar surroundings seemed different somehow, warmer and more inviting. This was no longer just David's mansion or Kendall's temporary residence. It was their home, a place where their love story had unexpectedly blossomed. That night, as they lay in bed together for the first time, not in separate rooms but side by side, David and Kendall talked late into the night. They shared their hopes, their fears, and their dreams for the future. It wasn't just pillow talk. It was the foundation of their new life together. I was thinking, David said, his fingers tracing lazy patterns on Kendall's arm, maybe we could take a real honeymoon, go somewhere neither of us has been before. Start this new chapter of our lives with a fresh perspective. Kendall's eyes lit up at the idea. I'd love that. Where were you thinking? How about New Zealand? Beautiful landscapes, adventure, culture, a little bit of everything. That sounds perfect, Kendall agreed, snuggling closer to him. A new adventure for our new beginning. As they drifted off to sleep, both David and Kendall felt a sense of peace and rightness that had been missing from their lives for so long. The journey ahead would undoubtedly have its challenges, but they were ready to face them together. Their love no longer a business arrangement, but a true partnership built on mutual respect, understanding, and deep affection. The dawn of their new life together was just beginning, and the future stretched out before them, full of promise and possibility. The Seattle morning dawned crisp and clear, sunlight streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the master bedroom. Kendall stirred, momentarily disoriented by the unfamiliar surroundings. Then she felt David's arm tighten around her waist, and the events of the past few days came rushing back. A smile spread across her face as she turned to look at her husband, her real husband now in every sense of the word. David's eyes fluttered open, a matching smile forming as he met Kendall's gaze. Good morning, Mrs. Ross, he murmured, his voice husky with sleep. Kendall laughed softly, the sound full of joy and a hint of disbelief. Good morning, Mr. Ross. Is this real? Did yesterday really happen? Instead of answering, David leaned in and kissed her, slow and sweet. When they parted, he rested his forehead against hers. Very real, he assured her, and just the beginning. As they lay there, basking in the newness of their genuine relationship, reality began to creep in. David's phone buzzed insistently on the nightstand, a stark reminder of the world waiting beyond their bedroom door. With a sigh, David reached for the device, his brow furrowed as he scrolled through his messages. The board wants an emergency meeting this afternoon, he said, his voice tight with tension. They're not happy about my decision to pull out of the Tokyo deal. Kendall propped herself up on one elbow, concern etched on her face. Do you regret it? Choosing me over the deal? David set the phone down and turned to her, his eyes intense. Not for a second, he said firmly. You're worth more than any business deal, Kendall. We'll figure this out together. His words warmed her heart, but Kendall couldn't shake the nagging feeling of guilt. She knew how much the company meant to David, how hard he'd worked to build it into the powerhouse it was today. Maybe there's a way to salvage the deal, she suggested. Something that doesn't require you to relocate. David considered this for a moment. It's worth exploring, he agreed. But whatever happens, We're in this together now. Your input matters to me, Kendall. Not just in our personal life, but in my professional decisions too." The sincerity in his voice touched Kendall deeply. This was a far cry from the aloof, business-focused man she'd first met. As they got up and prepared for the day ahead, Kendall marveled at how much they'd both changed in such a short time. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of adjustments and challenges as David and Kendall navigated their new reality. The board meeting had been tense, with several members expressing their disappointment in David's decision to prioritize his personal life over what they saw as a golden opportunity for the company. But David stood his ground, presenting alternative strategies for expansion that wouldn't require his relocation. Kendall, true to her word, threw herself into supporting David. She spent evenings poring over business reports with him, offering fresh perspectives that often led to innovative solutions. Her background in social work brought a unique approach to corporate strategy, emphasizing community impact and ethical practices that resonated with a new generation of consumers. One evening, as they sat surrounded by papers in David's home office, Kendall looked up to find him watching her with a soft smile. "What?" she asked, suddenly self-conscious. "Nothing," David said, shaking his head. "I'm just in awe of you. The way you've thrown yourself into this, how quickly you've grasped complex business concepts. You never cease to amaze me, Kendall." She blushed, still unused to such open admiration from him. "I'm just trying to help. This company is a part of you, David, which means it's a part of me now, too." David reached across the desk and took her hand, his thumb tracing circles on her palm. "You know, I used to think I had it all figured out. Success, to me, was all about the bottom line. But you've shown me there's so much more to it than that. The way you think about the impact of our decisions on people, on communities, it's changing the way I see everything." Kendall squeezed his hand, her heart swelling with love and pride. "We make a good team," she said softly. "The best," David agreed, leaning in to kiss her. As idyllic as their home life was becoming, the outside world presented its own set of challenges. Their first public appearance as a genuinely married couple was at a charity gala for the Ross Foundation. Kendall, despite her growing confidence in David's world, felt the weight of scrutiny as they entered the ballroom. Whispers followed them as they made their rounds, greeting donors and board members. Kendall caught snippets of conversation, speculation about their sudden closeness, doubts about her suitability as David's wife, thinly veiled judgments about her background. David, sensing her discomfort, kept a protective arm around her waist. "Ignore them," he murmured in her ear. "You belong here, just as much as anyone else." Kendall took a deep breath, drawing strength from his support. She reminded herself of how far she'd come, of the value she brought to their relationship and to the foundation's work. Squaring her shoulders, she plastered on a confident smile and dove into conversations with donors, passionately discussing the foundation's latest initiatives. As the evening wore on, Kendall found herself in conversation with a group of board members' wives. The women, dripping in diamonds and designer gowns, eyed her with a mixture of curiosity and skepticism. So Kendall, one of them, a statuesque blonde named Vivian, began with a saccharine smile. "Tell us how you and David met. It all happened so quickly, we barely had time to blink before you were married." Kendall felt a momentary panic, realizing they had never fully fleshed out their cover story. But then she remembered David's words, "No more pretending." Taking a deep breath, she decided to go with a version of the truth. "Actually, we met at an event much like this one," she said, her voice steady. "I was working as a waitress to put myself through school. I accidentally spilled champagne all over David's suit." The women tittered, exchanging glances. "How quaint," Vivian remarked, her tone making it clear she found it anything but. Kendall pressed on, determined not to let their judgment shake her. "It turned out to be the best mistake I ever made. David saw past the clumsy waitress to the person underneath. He gave me a chance, and in doing so, he changed both our lives." She felt a warm hand on her back and turned to see David standing beside her, having caught the tail end of her story. The love and pride shining in his eyes gave her the courage to continue. "I may not come from your world," Kendall addressed the group, her voice gaining strength, "but I'm learning, and I'm bringing my own experiences and perspectives to the table. David and I are partners in every sense of the word, and together we're working to make Ross Enterprises and the Ross Foundation forces for positive change in the world." A stunned silence followed her speech. Then, to Kendall's surprise, one of the older women in the group, Mrs. Hawthorne, stepped forward and took her hand. "My dear," she said warmly, "I think you're exactly what this stuffy old crowd needs. Welcome to the family." The moment marked a turning point for Kendall. She realized that she had underestimated herself, allowing her insecurities to overshadow her strengths. From that night on, she approached her role as David's wife and partner with renewed confidence and determination. As months passed, David and Kendall fell into a rhythm, balancing their personal life with the demands of running a major corporation and charitable foundation. They faced challenges together, from boardroom battles to family dramas. One particularly difficult moment came when David's sister, Sophia, decided to voice her disapproval of their relationship. She cornered Kendall at a family dinner, her words sharp and cutting. "I hope you know what you're doing," Sophia hissed, her eyes narrowed. "David may be infatuated now, but eventually he'll realize you're not cut out for this world. When that happens, don't expect any sympathy from me." Kendall felt her heart race, old insecurities threatening to surface. But then she thought of how far she'd come, of the strength she and David had found in each other. Drawing herself up to her full height, she met Sophia's gaze steadily. "I appreciate your concern, Sophia," she said calmly. "But David and I are in this for the long haul. I may not have been born into this world, but I'm learning fast, and I bring plenty of my own strengths to the table. I hope that one day you'll be able to see that and welcome me as a sister." Sophia blinked, clearly taken aback by Kendall's composed response. Before she could reply, David appeared at Kendall's side, having sensed the tension from across the room. "Everything okay here?" he asked, his tone light, but his eyes conveying a warning to his sister. "Just fine," Kendall assured him, taking his hand. "Sophia and I were just getting to know each other better." As they walked away, David squeezed Kendall's hand. "You handled that beautifully," he murmured. "I'm so proud of you." Kendall smiled up at him, feeling a surge of love and gratitude. "I learned from the best," she teased. Their ability to face challenges together extended to their professional lives as well. When the Ross Foundation faced a crisis involving misappropriated funds by a partner organization, it was Kendall's background in social work that provided the insight needed to salvage the situation. She worked tirelessly alongside David, conducting interviews, poring over financial records, and ultimately uncovering the truth. A well-intentioned but misguided attempt by the partner organization to stretch funds further than they could go. Instead of cutting ties, as some board members suggested, Kendall proposed a restructuring plan that would provide more oversight while still supporting the important work being done. David watched in awe as Kendall presented her findings and recommendations to the board. Her passion, combined with her practical approach, won over even the most skeptical members. As the meeting adjourned, with the board unanimously approving Kendall's plan, David couldn't help but marvel at how far they'd come. "You were amazing in there," he told her as they left the boardroom. "I don't think I've ever seen old Mr. Jameson nod along so enthusiastically to anything in his life." Kendall laughed, the sound bright and happy. "Well, I had a pretty good teacher when it comes to handling tough crowds," she said, bumping his shoulder playfully. As they walked to their car hand in hand, David felt a surge of emotion. "You know," he said, his voice thoughtful, "when I first proposed this whole arrangement, I never could have imagined it would turn out like this. You've changed everything, Kendall. The way I think about business, about success, about life. You've made it all so much richer." Kendall stopped, turning to face him. "You've changed my life too, David," she said softly. "You gave me a chance when no one else would. You believed in me, supported me. You've helped me grow in ways I never thought possible." They stood there for a moment, the Seattle drizzle falling softly around them, lost in each other's eyes. Then David pulled Kendall close, kissing her with a passion that took her breath away. "I love you," he murmured against her lips. "More than I ever thought possible." "I love you too," Kendall replied, her heart full to bursting. As perfect as things seemed, however, life had a way of throwing curveballs. Just when David and Kendall thought they had found their groove, a new challenge emerged that would test the strength of their relationship like never before. It started with a phone call late one night. David answered, his face growing increasingly grave as he listened to the person on the other end. When he hung up, he turned to Kendall with a troubled expression. "That was Richard," he said, referring to his lawyer. "There's a problem with the inheritance. Apparently Thomas is contesting the will. He's claiming that our marriage was a sham, orchestrated solely to meet the conditions of inheritance. Kendall felt her blood run cold. But that's not true, she protested. I mean, yes, it started that way, but we're real now. We love each other. David ran a hand through his hair, frustration evident in every line of his body. I know that. And you know that. But Thomas has apparently gathered some pretty compelling evidence. Emails, recordings of conversations, things from before we actually fell in love. The implications of this hit Kendall like a tidal wave. Everything they had built together, the life they had created, was suddenly at risk. And worse, their love, the real deep love that had grown between them, was being called into question. What do we do? She asked, her voice small and scared. David pulled her into his arms, holding her tight. We fight, he said firmly. Together. This is our life, our love, and we won't let anyone take that away from us. As they stood there, clinging to each other in the face of this new threat, both David and Kendall felt a flicker of uncertainty. They had overcome so much already, grown and changed in ways neither had thought possible, but this was different. This struck at the very foundation of their relationship. Could their love, born from an arrangement but grown into something real and profound, withstand this ultimate test? As the night deepened around them, neither David nor Kendall had the answer. All they knew was that they would face whatever came next, the way they had faced everything else since realizing their true feelings, together. The Seattle skyline loomed dark and imposing outside the floor-to-ceiling windows of David's home office. Inside, the tension was palpable as David, Kendall, and Richard Holbrook, David's longtime lawyer and friend, pored over documents spread across the massive oak desk. It doesn't look good, Richard said, his voice grave as he removed his reading glasses and pinched the bridge of his nose. Thomas has managed to gather quite a bit of evidence suggesting your marriage was, at least initially, a business arrangement. David's jaw clenched, his hand finding Kendall's under the table and squeezing it reassuringly. But that's not the whole story, he argued. Yes, it started that way, but our feelings are real now. Surely that counts for something, Richard sighed, shaking his head. In a court of law, I'm not sure. The fact that you entered into this marriage under false pretenses could be enough to invalidate the inheritance, and if that happens, David loses control of the company, Kendall finished, her voice barely above a whisper. The weight of those words hung heavy in the air. David's company wasn't just a business to him, it was his life's work, his father's legacy. The thought of losing it to his opportunistic cousin Thomas was almost unbearable. There has to be something we can do, Kendall insisted, her mind racing. What if we go public with our story, get ahead of it, show people how our relationship evolved? Richard considered this for a moment. It's risky. Once this gets out, there's no controlling the narrative. The media will have a field day. David stood abruptly, pacing the length of the office. I don't care about the media, he said, his voice tight with frustration. I care about keeping my company and protecting our relationship. There has to be a way to do both. As the night wore on, they strategized, debated, and planned. By the time Richard left in the early hours of the morning, they had the outline of a plan. They would indeed go public with their story, but on their own terms. A carefully crafted interview, timed press releases, and a comprehensive social media strategy would help them control the narrative. But as David and Kendall crawled into bed, exhausted and emotionally drained, a seed of doubt had been planted. The stark reminder of how their relationship had begun left them both feeling unsettled, though neither wanted to admit it. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of activity. David threw himself into damage control at the office, working long hours to reassure investors and board members. Kendall, meanwhile, took charge of their public relations strategy, working closely with the PR team to craft their message. It was during this time that the cracks in their relationship began to show. The stress of the situation brought old insecurities to the surface. Kendall found herself second-guessing every interaction, wondering if David truly saw her as an equal partner, or if some part of him still viewed her as the waitress he had made a deal with. David, for his part, struggled with guilt. Watching Kendall work tirelessly to save his company and their reputation, he couldn't help but feel responsible for dragging her into this mess. Had he been selfish in pursuing a relationship with her, knowing the complications it could bring? These unspoken doubts created a distance between them, small at first, but growing with each passing day. Their once easy conversations became stilted, filled with careful words and hidden meanings. Physical intimacy dwindled as both retreated into themselves, unsure how to bridge the growing gap. The situation came to a head on the eve of their big interview, a prime-time special that would air nationally. David had been at the office all day, fielding calls from concerned board members and strategizing with his legal team. When he finally arrived home well past midnight, he found Kendall still awake, sitting in the darkened living room. "Hey," he said softly, loosening his tie as he sank onto the couch beside her. "You should be asleep. Big day tomorrow." Kendall turned to look at him, her eyes shimmering with unshed tears. "I've been thinking," she said, her voice trembling slightly. Maybe this isn't going to work." David felt his heart drop. "What do you mean?" "The interview. We've prepared for every possible question, Kendall. We'll be fine." She shook her head, a sad smile playing at her lips. "Not the interview, David. Us. This relationship." For a moment, David couldn't breathe. The world seemed to tilt on its axis as he struggled to process her words. "Kendall," he managed finally, reaching for her hand. "Where is this coming from? I thought we were in this together." Kendall pulled away, standing up and wrapping her arms around herself. "Are we? Really? Because lately it feels like we're right back where we started. You, consumed with saving your company. Me, trying to prove that I belong in your world." "That's not true," David protested, rising to face her. "You do belong. You're my wife, my partner." "Am I?" Kendall challenged, her voice rising. "Or am I still just a convenient solution to your problems? The girl from the wrong side of the tracks who's useful for improving your image?" David recoiled as if she'd slapped him. "How can you say that? After everything we've been through, everything we've shared?" "Because sometimes I wonder if any of it was real," Kendall cried, the dam finally breaking. Tears streamed down her face as she continued. "We built this relationship on a lie, David. And now, with all of this happening, I can't help but question everything. Do you really love me? Or did you just convince yourself you did because it was convenient?" The accusation hit David like a physical blow. He staggered back, hurt and anger warring within him. "Is that really what you think of me?" he asked, his voice low and dangerous. "That I'm capable of that kind of deception, of using you like that?" Kendall's silence was answer enough. The space between them, mere feet in reality, suddenly felt like an unbridgeable chasm. "I can't do this right now," David said finally, his voice thick with emotion. "We have an interview in a few hours. We need to be focused." "The interview," Kendall repeated, a bitter laugh escaping her. "Of course. The company always comes first, doesn't it?" Without waiting for a response, she turned and fled up the stairs. The sound of their bedroom door slamming echoed through the house like a gunshot. David stood alone in the darkened living room, feeling as though his world was crumbling around him. How had they gone from planning their future together to this in a matter of weeks? The weight of it all, the threat to his company, the public scrutiny, and now this rift with Kendall, felt crushing. In that moment, David made a decision. If Kendall truly believed he was capable of such calculated deception, perhaps it was better to let her go. He would face the interview and the legal battle alone. It was, after all, his mess to clean up. With a heavy heart, he made his way to the guest room, knowing sleep would be impossible but needing to escape the emptiness of their shared bedroom. The next morning dawned grey and drizzly, matching the somber mood that hung over the house. David and Kendall moved around each other like ghosts, speaking only when necessary as they prepared for the interview. The makeup artist and stylist who arrived commented on the tension, but both plastered on fake smiles and assured them everything was fine. As they rode to the studio in silence, Kendall found herself studying David's profile. The man beside her looked like a stranger, guarded, cold, every inch the ruthless businessman she had first met. Had she imagined the warmth, the love that had grown between them? Or had it all been a beautiful illusion, shattered by the harsh light of reality? The interview itself was a masterclass in composure. David and Kendall played their parts perfectly, presenting a united front to the world. They spoke of their unconventional beginning with carefully rehearsed honesty, emphasizing how their arrangement had blossomed into real love. But beneath the polished veneer, both were crumbling. Every touch, every loving glance exchanged for the camera felt like a lie. By the time the interview ended, both were emotionally exhausted. As soon as they were off camera, the facade cracked. Without a word to each other, they went their separate ways. David to the office, Kendall back to their home that suddenly felt cold and empty. Days passed, then weeks. David threw himself into fighting the legal battle, working around the clock to save his company. Kendall busied herself with foundation work, avoiding the mansion as much as possible. They existed in a state of painful limbo, neither willing to officially end things, but unable to find their way back to each other. It was Sophia, of all people, who finally intervened. She cornered Kendall after a foundation meeting, her usual sharp demeanor softened by concern. "What's going on with you and my brother?" she demanded without preamble. Kendall sighed, too tired to put up a fight. "It's complicated, Sophia." "Bullshit," Sophia retorted. "I've watched you two dance around each other for months. The way you look at each other, that's not complicated. That's love. Real, messy, terrifying love." Kendall felt tears prick at her eyes. "Maybe it was," she admitted softly. "But now, I don't know if we can come back from this." Sophia's expression softened further. "Do you want to know how I know you and David are the real deal?" At Kendall's questioning look, she continued, "Because you've changed him, in ways I never thought possible. He's more compassionate, more thoughtful. He considers the human impact of his business decisions now. That's all you, Kendall." The words hit Kendall like a tidal wave, washing away weeks of doubt and insecurity. She thought back to all the little moments, David's growing enthusiasm for the Foundation's work, his newfound interest in sustainable business practices, the way he had started to really listen to and value the opinions of those around him. I need to talk to him," Kendall realized, her heart racing. Sophia smiled, a rare, genuine expression on her usually stern face. "Then, what are you waiting for?" Across town, David sat in his office, staring unseeingly at the skyline. The legal battle was reaching its crescendo, with a court date looming on the horizon. But for once, his mind wasn't on the case. It was on Kendall. He missed her. The realization hit him with startling clarity. He missed her laugh, her compassion, the way she challenged him to be better. The company, the inheritance, none of it meant anything without her by his side. Just as he was reaching for his phone, determined to call her and make things right, his office door burst open. Kendall stood there, slightly out of breath, her eyes wild and determined. "Kendall?" David stood, shock and hope warring on his face. "What are you—" "I love you," Kendall interrupted, the words tumbling out in a rush. "I love you, and I'm sorry. I let my insecurities and the stress of everything cloud my judgment. But the truth is, you make me better, David. You challenge me, you support me, you believe in me in ways no one ever has before." David moved around his desk, drawn to her like a magnet. "Kendall, No, please, let me finish," she pressed on. "I was scared that what we had wasn't real, that I'd lose myself in your world. But I realize now that I was wrong. We built something real, something beautiful, and I don't want to lose that. I don't want to lose you." As she finished speaking, tears streaming down her face, David closed the distance between them in 2 long strides. He cupped her face in his hands, his own eyes shimmering with emotion. "Kendall Ross," he said, his voice thick with feeling, "loving you is the most real thing I've ever done. You haven't lost yourself in my world. You've expanded it, made it brighter and more meaningful than I ever thought possible. I'm so sorry for letting you doubt that, even for a moment." And then he was kissing her, pouring weeks of longing and love into the embrace. Kendall responded with equal fervor, clinging to him as if he were a lifeline in a storm. When they finally parted, both breathless and smiling through their tears, David rested his forehead against hers. "I don't care about the company," he said softly. "I don't care about the inheritance. None of it matters without you. You're my family now, Kendall. You're my home." Kendall's heart soared at his words. "So what do we do now?" she asked, hope blooming in her chest. David's eyes sparkled with renewed determination. Now we fight. Together. Not just for the company, but for us. For our future." As they stood there, wrapped in each other's arms, in the middle of David's office, both felt a shift. The challenges ahead were still daunting, but they no longer seemed insurmountable. They had found their way back to each other, stronger and more committed than ever. In the days that followed, David and Kendall presented a truly united front. They met with lawyers, spoke to the press, and prepared for the upcoming court battle with a synchronicity that impressed everyone around them. Their love, tested by fire, had emerged stronger and more resilient. The court case itself was a grueling affair. Thomas's lawyers presented their evidence, painting a picture of a cold, calculated arrangement. But David and Kendall's testimony, raw and honest about the evolution of their relationship, resonated with the judge and jury. It was Kendall's impassioned speech on the stand that ultimately turned the tide. She spoke of her initial doubts, her struggles to fit into David's world, but then she described how their arrangement had blossomed into something real and profound. "Yes, our marriage began as a business deal," she admitted, her voice clear and strong. "But what grew from that beginning is more genuine and powerful than any love story I've ever known. David has changed me, challenged me to be the best version of myself, and I've watched him grow too, becoming more compassionate and considerate in both his personal life and his business practices." She turned to look directly at David as she continued, "What we have isn't just love. It's a partnership in the truest sense of the word. We make each other better. We support each other's dreams. We've built a life together that's far more valuable than any inheritance." Her words, spoken with such sincerity and emotion, left not a dry eye in the courtroom. Even Thomas, watching from the plaintiff's table, seemed moved. In the end, the judge ruled in David and Kendall's favor. The inheritance stood, with David retaining control of the company. But as they left the courthouse, hands clasped tightly together, both realized that they had gained something far more valuable than money or business success. That night, as they stood on the balcony of their home looking out over the Seattle skyline, David turned to Kendall with a serious expression. "I've been thinking," he said, taking both her hands in his. "This whole experience has made me realize what's truly important. I want to restructure the company, focus more on sustainable practices and community impact. And I want you by my side every step of the way, not just as my wife, but as a full partner. Your insight, your compassion, they're invaluable, Kendall. What do you say? Will you help me reshape Ross Enterprises into something we can both be proud of?" Kendall felt tears of joy welling in her eyes. This was more than she had ever dreamed possible. "Yes," she breathed, squeezing his hands. "Yes to all of it. Partners in every way." David's face broke into a radiant smile. He pulled her close, kissing her with a passion that spoke of new beginnings and endless possibilities. As they stood there, wrapped in each other's arms with the city lights twinkling around them, both David and Kendall knew that they had found something rare and precious. Their love, born from an unconventional beginning, had been tested and tempered. Now, stronger than ever, it was ready to take on whatever challenges the future might hold. The journey ahead would undoubtedly have its ups and downs. Reshaping a major corporation, balancing their personal and professional lives, and continuing to grow together as a couple would not be easy. But as they gazed into each other's eyes, alight with love and shared purpose, David and Kendall were certain of one thing. Together they could accomplish anything. Their story, which had begun as a business arrangement, had transformed into a true partnership of the heart and mind. It was a testament to the power of love to overcome obstacles, bridge differences, and create something beautiful and enduring. As the night deepened around them, David and Kendall remained on the balcony, talking excitedly about their plans for the future. The world was open before them, full of possibilities, and they were ready to face it together, not as the millionaire and the waitress, but as equal partners in love and life. The early morning sun filtered through the windows of David and Kendall Ross's penthouse, casting a warm glow over the sea of cardboard boxes that filled the living room. Kendall stood in the center of the chaos, a cup of coffee in one hand and a packing list in the other, surveying the scene with a mixture of excitement and nostalgia. "I think that's the last of it," David said, emerging from their bedroom with a final box labeled Memories. He set it down gently among the others and wrapped his arms around Kendall from behind, resting his chin on her shoulder. "Are you sure about this? It's not too late to change your mind." Kendall leaned back into his embrace, a soft smile playing on her lips. "I've never been more sure of anything," she said, turning to face him. "This place, it's beautiful, but it's your past. I want us to build our future together, somewhere that's ours from the start." David nodded, his eyes shining with love and admiration. "You're right as usual," he chuckled. "Besides, I have a feeling I'm going to love our new home even more. It already has the most important thing, you." As they shared a tender kiss, both reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. The tumultuous court battle was behind them, David's position at Ross Enterprises secure. But the experience had sparked a desire for change in both of them, a yearning to strip away the excesses and focus on what truly mattered. Their decision to move had come as a shock to many in their social circle. Downsizing from a luxury penthouse to a modest craftsman-style home in a quiet Seattle neighborhood seemed incomprehensible to those who measured success in square footage and designer labels. But for David and Kendall, it represented a new beginning, a physical manifestation of the changes they were implementing in every aspect of their lives. As the movers began to arrive, efficiently loading boxes onto their truck, David and Kendall took one last walk through the empty penthouse. Each room held memories, some challenging, others beautiful, of the unconventional start to their relationship and the genuine love that had blossomed against all odds. "Remember our first dance lesson?" Kendall asked as they passed the living room, now echoing and bare. David grinned, pulling her into his arms and twirling her playfully. "How could I forget? You were so nervous, but by the end of the night, you were gliding across the floor like you were born to it." Kendall laughed, the sound bouncing off the empty walls. "Only because I had an excellent teacher," she said, stretching up to kiss him softly. As they made their way to the kitchen, David's expression grew more serious. "This is where we had our first real fight," he said quietly, running his hand along the marble countertop. "When everything almost fell apart." Kendall squeezed his hand reassuringly. "And where we found our way back to each other," she reminded him. "Every challenge we faced only made us stronger." Their final stop was the master bedroom balcony, overlooking the Seattle skyline. It was here that they had shared so many intimate moments, from late-night conversations to early morning coffees. "I'm going to miss this view," David admitted, his arm around Kendall's waist as they gazed out at the city. Kendall leaned into him, her head on his shoulder. "We'll have a new view to fall in love with," she said softly, "and we'll be creating it together, every step of the way." With one last lingering look, they turned away from the vista that had been the backdrop to the beginning of their love story. Hand in hand, they walked out of the penthouse, ready to embark on the next chapter of their lives. The drive to their new home was filled with a giddy sort of excitement. As they pulled up to the charming craftsman house, with its welcoming front porch and neatly manicured lawn, both David and Kendall felt a sense of rightness settle over them. "Home sweet home," David said, helping Kendall out of the car. They stood for a moment, taking in the sight of the moving truck already parked in the driveway, movers efficiently carrying boxes inside. "It's perfect," Kendall breathed, her eyes shining. The house was a far cry from the sleek modernity of the penthouse, but its warmth and character spoke to something deep within her. This was a place where they could build a life, create memories, maybe even start a family one day. As they crossed the threshold together, David surprised Kendall by sweeping her off her feet. "I believe it's tradition to carry the bride over the doorway," he said with a grin, kissing her as he set her down in their new entryway. Kendall laughed, her heart full of joy. "I think that's usually reserved for the first time you enter your home as newlyweds," she teased. "Well, in a way, this is our first real home together," David pointed out. "The penthouse was my space that you moved into. This is ours from the very beginning." The next few weeks were a whirlwind of unpacking, decorating, and adjusting to their new life. The process of blending their different styles and preferences into a cohesive home was both challenging and rewarding. David's taste ran towards the modern and minimalist, while Kendall favored cozier, more eclectic designs. But as they worked together, compromising and finding creative solutions, their home began to take shape as a perfect reflection of their united life. One sunny Saturday afternoon found them in the backyard, working side by side to plant a vegetable garden. Kendall, up to her elbows in soil, couldn't help but laugh at the sight of David Ross, once the epitome of corporate polish, now wearing old jeans and a t-shirt as he wrestled with a particularly stubborn root. "What's so funny?" David asked, wiping sweat from his brow and leaving a smudge of dirt in its wake. Kendall shook her head, still chuckling. "Just thinking about how much things have changed. If someone had told me a year ago that I'd be gardening with David Ross in our backyard, I would have thought they were crazy." David grinned, setting down his trowel and moving to sit beside her. "Life has a way of surprising us," he said, taking her hand, "but I wouldn't change a thing. Well, except maybe for this root that refuses to budge." As they sat there, surrounded by half-planted seedlings and the promise of future harvests, both felt an overwhelming sense of contentment. This simple act of creating something together, of quite literally putting down roots, symbolized everything their relationship had become. Their new life wasn't without its challenges, of course. Adapting to a more modest lifestyle took some adjustment, particularly for David. There were moments of frustration as he learned to navigate everyday tasks he'd previously delegated to staff, loading the dishwasher, doing laundry, even cooking the occasional meal. But Kendall was there every step of the way, her patience and encouragement a constant source of support. She took genuine joy in teaching David these domestic skills, and he approached each new challenge with the same determination he'd once applied to closing business deals. One evening, as they worked together to prepare dinner, David paused in his somewhat clumsy attempt at chopping vegetables. "You know," he said thoughtfully, "I used to think success was all about the next big deal, the bigger house, the fancier car. But this, just being here with you, making a meal together, I've never felt more successful in my life." Kendall set down the wooden spoon she'd been using to stir the sauce, moved by his words. She wrapped her arms around him, not caring about the flour on her hands or the tomato sauce simmering on the stove. "I know exactly what you mean," she said softly. "This is success. This is happiness." As they settled into their new routine, David and Kendall also worked on resolving lingering conflicts with those around them. Sophia, David's sister, had been skeptical of their relationship from the start. But seeing the positive changes in her brother, his newfound warmth, his genuine happiness, had begun to soften her stance. The turning point came when Sophia visited their new home for the first time. She arrived with a housewarming gift and a slightly bemused expression, clearly expecting to find David miserable in his downsized surroundings. Instead, she was greeted by the sight of her brother and sister-in-law laughing together as they attempted to hang a set of shelves, looking more relaxed and content than she'd ever seen them. "Well," Sophia said, as Kendall welcomed her in, "I have to admit this isn't quite what I expected." Kendall smiled, recognizing the olive branch for what it was. "Why don't you stay for dinner?" she offered. "David's trying out a new recipe. It might be a disaster, but it'll definitely be entertaining." Sophia hesitated for a moment before nodding. "I'd like that," she said, a genuine smile softening her usually sharp features. That evening marked a new chapter in their family dynamics. As they shared a meal, which turned out to be surprisingly edible, conversation flowed easily. Sophia found herself warming to Kendall's genuine nature and quick wit, while Kendall gained a new appreciation for Sophia's dry humor and fierce loyalty to her brother. By the time Sophia left, hugging both David and Kendall goodbye, it was clear that a corner had been turned. The last vestiges of doubt and suspicion had been replaced by the beginnings of a true sisterly bond. As spring turned to summer, David and Kendall's life together continued to evolve and deepen. Their individual growth was reflected in their professional lives as well. David, true to his word, had begun implementing significant changes at Ross Enterprises. With Kendall's input and support, he steered the company towards more sustainable and socially responsible practices. One particularly proud moment came when they launched a new initiative that partnered with local community colleges to provide internships and job training for underprivileged youth. As they stood together at the press conference announcing the program, Kendall couldn't help but marvel at how far they'd come. "You did it," she whispered to David as they posed for photos, her hand squeezing his discreetly. David shook his head slightly, his eyes finding hers. "We did it," he corrected. "I couldn't have done any of this without you, Kendall. Your vision, your compassion, you've changed everything." Their influence on each other was evident in countless small ways. Kendall, once intimidated by the corporate world, now moved through it with confidence, her natural empathy and insight proving invaluable in navigating complex business relationships. David, in turn, had developed a deeper appreciation for the everyday joys of life, finding as much satisfaction in successfully growing his first tomato as he once had in closing multi-million-dollar deals. As summer faded into fall, David and Kendall celebrated their first anniversary in their new home. The occasion was marked not with an extravagant party or expensive gifts, but with a quiet evening at home, much like any other, yet infused with the weight of all they'd been through and the promise of all that was yet to come. They sat on their back porch, a bottle of wine between them, watching the sun set over their now thriving vegetable garden. The air was crisp with the first hint of autumn, and Kendall snuggled closer to David, pulling a soft blanket around them both. "A happy anniversary, Mrs. Ross," David murmured, pressing a kiss to her temple. Kendall smiled, tilting her face up to meet his lips properly. "Happy anniversary, Mr. Ross," she replied. "Can you believe it's been a year?" David shook his head in wonder. "In some ways, it feels like just yesterday that I proposed this crazy arrangement, and in others, it feels like we've been together forever," Kendall finished for him. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, sipping their wine and reflecting on the journey that had brought them to this moment. The fading light painted the sky in brilliant hues of orange and pink, a fitting backdrop to their quiet celebration. "I have something for you," David said suddenly, reaching into his pocket. He pulled out a small velvet box, causing Kendall's breath to catch. "David," she began, but he shook his head, silencing her gently. "I know we're already married," he said, opening the box to reveal a stunning yet understated diamond ring. "But that first time, it wasn't real, at least not in the way it should have been. So, Kendall Ross, love of my life, partner in everything. Will you marry me again, for real this time, no contracts, no arrangements? Just us choosing each other every day for the rest of our lives?" Tears sprang to Kendall's eyes as she looked at the man before her. So different from the cold, business-focused individual she'd first met, yet fundamentally the same strength, the same determination, but now softened and enriched by love, compassion, and a deep appreciation for the things that truly mattered in life. "Yes," she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. 1,000 times yes. As David slipped the ring onto her finger, right above her original wedding band, both felt the significance of the moment. This wasn't just a renewal of their vows. It was a testament to how far they'd come, to the strength of a love that had begun as a business arrangement and blossomed into something profound and unbreakable. They sealed the moment with a kiss, soft and sweet and full of promise. As they parted, David rested his forehead against Kendall's, his eyes shining with unshed tears of joy. "You know," he said softly, "when I first proposed this arrangement, I thought I was so clever. I thought I had it all figured out, how to keep my company, how to meet my grandfather's conditions. But I had no idea that I was actually setting myself up for the greatest adventure of my life." Kendall smiled, running her fingers through his hair. "And what an adventure it's been," she agreed. "From penthouse to craftsman, from arrangement to true love, I wouldn't change a single moment of it." As the last rays of sunlight faded from the sky, David and Kendall remained on their porch, talking softly about their plans for the future. They discussed renewing their vows in a small ceremony, surrounded by only their closest friends and family. They dreamed about the possibility of starting a family of their own, imagining the patter of little feet on the hardwood floors of their cozy home. But mostly, they simply enjoyed being together, secure in the knowledge that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them as they had faced everything else, side by side, partners in every sense of the word. As night fell and the first stars began to twinkle in the sky, David and Kendall's love story, unconventional, unexpected, and all the more precious for the obstacles it had overcome, continued to unfold. Their journey from a contract to true love was not just complete, it was the foundation for a lifetime of shared dreams, mutual growth, and unwavering commitment. In the warm glow of their back porch light, with the scent of ripening vegetables from their garden floating on the breeze, David and Kendall Ross looked to the future with hope, excitement, and above all, love. Their story, which had begun with a business proposition in a world of corporate high-rises and charity galas, had found its true home in a modest craftsman house, where the greatest luxury of all was the deep and abiding love they shared. And as they finally rose to head inside, hand in hand, both knew with absolute certainty that this life, this love, this partnership was the most valuable thing either of them would ever possess. It was, in every sense, their happily ever after. If this story touched your heart and you want to keep following inspiring and moving stories, be sure to check out our upcoming videos, subscribe to our channel, and turn on notifications to stay updated on new content that can brighten your journey and provide valuable insights. Join us and keep exploring stories that truly matter. I'm sure the next video that pops up on your screen will touch you as well, so click on it now and we'll see you there.